Tom Simmons here again with another installment of Economics with Tully. And today, as part of the Sports Economics Lecture Series, we're going to be looking at, briefly, at the topic of competitive balance, which is really where a lot of the previous videos and lessons have been leading up to. We've spent a lot of time looking at the way the leagues are structured and how revenue is shared between the leagues. And I suppose that raises the question, why are the teams within a particular league sharing their revenue in the first place? Why does one business or a team want, or should they be required to actually donate part of the profit that they have made to someone else? And part of this is related to the interdependence of one team on another team. It's often been said, as much as New York Yankees and Boston Red Sox fans have this rivalry, the fact of the matter is the best thing that has ever happened to the Boston Red Sox is the New York Yankees, because those rivalries create interest and ignite passions and drive people to the stadiums to watch the games and drive people to the TV set to watch the games, which enables the broadcasters to charge higher rates for advertisers, and that allows the league itself to charge higher rates for the broadcasting rights, and there's a domino effect here. And that only happens when there is real interest in the outcome of the game. If the outcome of games are foregone conclusions and everyone knows who is going to win all the time, interest actually wanes, not only for that team, but for the losing team and for the other teams in the league as well. And that's why sports managers and sports economists in particular have been looking at this notion of competitive balance. And on the one hand, everyone pretty well understands what we're talking about when we talk about competitive balance in a very general way. If we look at some of the dynasties and the results of some of those dynasty years of some teams in sports, we can see the result of a lack of competitive balance. For instance, start with the Yankees in the 1950s. From 1950 to 1958, the New York Yankees won every single American League pennant except for one. And during the same years, 50 through 58, they won the World Series 6 times. It became very obvious to fans who was going to win. That actually may be responsible for some pretty bad drop-offs in attendance at the games during those years. For instance, in 1950, when the Yankees began this dynasty in the 50s, they had attendance of over 2 million fans in the seats for that season. And in fact, the American League, in total, had an attendance of over 9 million fans in the seats. Well, as the years of the 50s went on, and the Yankees continued to win the pennant every single year except for one, and then would go on to win the World Series in 6 of those years, attendance at Yankee games actually fell every single year. So the Yankees went from 2 million fans in the seats in 1950 to 1.9 million in the seats the next year, to 1.6 million the next year, to 1.5 million the next year. By 1958, attendance at Yankee games had fallen from more than 2 million fans in the seats to 1.5 2.4 million fans in the seats. That's a difference of 600,000 paying fans. And it didn't just affect the Yankees, it affected the entire American League. Because the American League, which had an attendance of 9.1 million in 1950, also began dropping, and so by 1958, there were only 7.2 million fans in the seats. Now, one could say, well, gee, maybe baseball itself was just having competition from other sports, or there was a declining lack in interest in baseball. One could argue that during the 50s, more and more families had television sets, so rather than going to the game, they were able now to watch the game on TV. Well, that might be a legitimate theory, except it didn't happen in the National League. At the same time that all of these attendance figures fell at Yankee Stadium and across the American League, National League attendance went from 8 million, actually 8.3 million in 1950, and actually climbed to 10.1 million by 1958, which meant that we started this dynasty, this Yankee dynasty in 1950. The American League had been pulling out more fans than the National League. By the end of the 50s, that was reversed. The American League attendance had fallen. National League attendance actually had increased. And part of the thought behind that is that in the American League, everything was a gone conclusion. It wasn't exciting anymore. It wasn't unpredictable. We knew what was going to happen. At least if you went to a National League game, you may end up with a 5-4 win because of a home run in the bottom of the ninth inning, and it was exciting. You didn't know what was going to happen. And during this period of time, it wasn't just baseball, and it wasn't just the Yankees who were establishing these dynasties. There was a period of dynasties that began there in other sports as well. For instance, the Boston Celtics won every single NBA championship except for one from 1959 to 1969. From 65 to 79, the Montreal Canadiens won the NHL Stanley Cup 10 times. When their dynasty fell, then the Islanders picked up, and they won 4 years in a row. So there was this whole period of time, beginning in the 50s right up through the mid-60s, 70s, where you kind of had a good guess as to who was going to win the ultimate prize at the end of the season. And that has an effect on fans' interest in the game. Now, efforts have been made to measure, to quantify, to put into mathematical metrics. Can you measure competitive balance? And there actually are many different formulas, and many different economists and mathematicians have looked at this to try and come up with a formula. Is there a way to tell how competitive a league actually is? Most of them are very complicated and involving advanced calculus, and I'm not going to be going through that with you or requiring that of you. Suffice it to say that there is no one right way of doing it. Part of the problem is not knowing how many years do you look at. Do you look at a 10-year spread, or do you look at a 20-year spread? Or do you look at something longer or shorter than that? Do you look just within a conference, within a league, or do you look at the entire league result itself? Is there a difference depending on whether the particular sport has few games or many, many games? It has been argued, and I think it makes sense, that at least with baseball, with the incredibly long season and many games, that fans tire very quickly if they see that the end of the season is almost a foregone conclusion. Whereas with football, with the few number of games, there aren't as many matchups, so each matchup is an opportunity to see, well, gee, what's going to happen? We don't know who's going to win. And that the other sports fall somewhere in between there. So we understand the concept of competitive balance. We're not very good at measuring exactly how do you determine is the NBA more competitively balanced than the NHL or Major League Baseball or soccer. It becomes much harder knowing exactly how to measure that. But that's the reason for the revenue sharing. The concept has always been, or the assumption has been, that teams that can spend a lot of money on their players will get the best players and therefore constantly win. Now, one can argue that presumption right there is wrong from the start. The New York Mets spend more money than God on players and teams, and it hasn't necessarily resulted in any significant number of wins in the last generation or two. So the assumption, again, is that having a lot of money makes it possible for you to get great players, great training, and win. Following that assumption, then we want to take funds, revenues, profits from those teams and offer them to the teams that are struggling, that don't have as many gate receipts, that don't have as much wealth behind them, because that will enable them to be able to be more competitive. And if everybody is more competitive, then that excites fans on both sides, and that fans will be more willing to come to the game, more willing to spend money, will be more excited about the broadcast, and it helps everybody. In other words, a rising tide helps float everybody's boat. So that if you help the struggling teams, you are actually helping the entire league. That's also the theory behind some of the other concepts that we've looked at over the last 5 weeks. The idea of a reverse order draft, which allows the teams that are most struggling to be able to get some of the best players. The idea of salary caps, that you can't just spend unlimited amounts of money on new players. So the whole approach with European soccer, not American soccer, of promotion and relegation in order to keep good, competitive, strong teams in a league, and to take those that are not doing so well and kind of drop them down a level. So unlike the MLS in the U.S., which just basically said we are just like pulling the rug from Chivas, and we're not going to have a Chivas. That's the end of that team. That in Europe, that team would have been relegated to a lower level league, and a new team brought up, which would have engendered a little bit of excitement about, is this team going to be able to do well with the rest of the teams in this particular league? So, as I said, the concept of competitive balance is complicated. There are no two mathematicians or economists who agree as to how it should be measured and what the right criteria should be for measuring it. But everyone pretty much is on the same page that when there is uncertainty within a league as to who's going to win, and there's a chance for a lot of different teams to get into playoffs or to actually win either a pennant or a final, the final goal, whether it be the Stanley Cup or the Super Bowl or the World Series, that generates more interest all around. It helps all teams, and it brings more money in. And looking at what happened to gate receipts and viewership during the Yankees' reign in the 1950s sort of lends some quantifiable credence to that idea. That if everyone knows what's going to happen, why bother? Let's do something else. Let's do something that's a little less known as an outcome. So this lesson, the readings, the work I'm going to have you do is all based on trying to look at different ways of analyzing maybe some of your favorite sports as to whether or not this competitive balance currently exists, and whether that balance has gotten better or worse. Have all of the techniques that sports have used to increase competitive balance. The reverse order draft, the salary caps, luxury taxes, revenue sharing, all these things we've been talking about. Has it actually worked? Has it made the leagues more or less competitive? We'll have to look at who's won what over the course of the years, make some comparisons, draw some conclusions. And that's what I'll be having you do during this particular lesson. Okay, Tom Simmons signing off with that very brief intro into the topic.